Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Let's Dev. Now before we get into this episode, I just want to give a huge shout out to everyone who watched the first episode, left a like and or a comment. Seriously, it was such a relief to see a positive reaction to the first episode because I was unbelievably nervous about how it would be received. So once again, thank you so much. Now with that said, let's actually recap what we did in that episode. So in the first episode, we started our foundation for our random map generator. We created a master builder that would build our main roads throughout the map, and on every frame it would drop a tile, and that master builder would move in a set direction based on a destination given to it on its creation, and a little bit of RNG to mix it up and not create a continuously straight path. And all of that lovely coding goodness was wrapped up in a ton of accidental wasted time due to typos, a lack of attention to detail, and some bad math. But we still got through it, and that was indeed our first steps into our crazy zany ideal for a video game. Now if you follow me on Twitter, you know exactly where we're going with this. This is actually not the second time I'm recording a Let's Dev video. So long story short, I recorded a second episode of Let's Dev, and when I went to export my commentary audio, that program crashed, and thus I lost my commentary. But fear not, I still have the footage, so at the very least I can still do a recap of that episode. So let's do just that and recap what happened in the lost episode 2, Electric Boogaloo. Now the first thing I did even before I started that video was change the color of the map to make it a little more visually aesthetically pleasing, and that included a green background with brown trails to simulate like grass on dirt. But I should note that at least up here in the mine bank, that's probably not the aesthetic that we will be going with when we get to graphics. But for the sake of making it prettier than gray background and red lines, I figure that it's nicer to look at least, and a little easier to intake as a viewer. Now the next thing I did was modify the master builder a bit by giving it a random starting position instead of a static absolute middle position that we had beforehand. So aside from a bit of margin, that allowed the master builder to choose in between certain coordinates on its given axis. The second modification I made to the master builder was the movement code. I gave the master builder a random chance to stop its main direction movement. This was done to give the trails a bit more diversity and to break up the monotony a bit. After all the tweaking to the master builder, I decided to add a very early test version for branching paths, and before toning down the random chance that they would spawn, boy did those branching paths really just tank the performance of our poor game. So now with a very early version of the branching paths in place, it was time to take a look back at the master builder and start finalizing the main road code. And after a lot of tinkering, a conditional was added that would determine when the master builder reaches its destination that it should stop doing what it's doing. Basically what I would deem the that'll do pig moment. Okay, that's a stupid way to refer to it now that I say it out loud. Never gonna say that again. And then we ended that lovely session by just letting the master builder go crazy, and as you would expect with the given code, it was basically watching someone slowly color in a bunch of pixels. But that was the gist of the lost episode, and this is usually the part of the fairy tale where you're at the lowest low and it just ramps back up to the highest highs. But unfortunately we go to an even lower low because once again, if you do follow me on Twitter, you'll already know where this one is going. So like the bad luck that I tend to have, this is actually unfortunately the fourth time I'm recording any type of Let's Dev commentary, because I tried to record a third episode of Let's Dev, and surprise surprise, I lost a commentary for that episode as well. But luckily I still have the footage. Now I want to stress that I didn't think lightning would strike twice, and I'm already taking precautions in the future, so hopefully this is not going to happen again. Fingers crossed, Lucky Rabbit's foot, everything. I need your power like a spirit bomb. But let's not dwell. Let's recap the second lost episode. Technically, what should have been episode 3 of Let's Dev. Okay, let's do it. Oh, I just hate saying that out loud. It's so depressing, but let's do it. Let's do it. So we started off that episode by focusing on refining the branching paths that we introduced in episode 2. Or last episode 2. And the thing I really noticed about the tests in the previous episode was the branching paths hitting a wall and just sort of just dragging itself across the wall like some kind of broken Look, I just cut out a really bad analogy because it made me sound even dumber than I realized. Look, it just didn't behave right. So instead, what I decided to do was go into the code and try to fix that. So first thing first was to make sure that it worked on its own. So I put it in a small controlled map to just test the redirection code, which basically told the branching paths, if you get to an edge, if you get to a certain margin, pretty much just do a U-turn. So for example, if the dominant direction was to go left and it hits the left wall, just do a U-turn and go to the right. And surprisingly, this worked out pretty much exactly how I imagined it. So with that successfully done, we put all of that to test in the full map generation itself, and it seemed to work pretty damn well. So you can tell at this point, it's starting to make a little bit more sense. We're seeing the main road, we're seeing some branching paths, and we're getting some pretty nice layouts here, if I do say so myself. So with the branching stuff a little better off now, we put our focus back into the master builder, and we added an end marker to keep track of where the end of the main road would be. And I'm actually glad I added this when I did, because it showed me how bad my math was off. Okay, a little bit of an over-exaggeration, but my math was in fact off, and so the end marker was ending up off screen, so that gave me a chance to fix some of my mathing. That was until I noticed, and thank God GameMaker Studio has a static seed, because I was able to recreate this issue over and over again. I noticed that one marker would always just never show up. I checked my math, I even put in some debug coding to figure out where exactly it was, and according to the code, that end marker was still on the map somewhere, I just couldn't see it. But the funny story there is, yes indeed, the map marker was where the debugging said it was, but the reason I couldn't see it was because one of the branching paths kept drawing a tile over it. Indeed, this issue started because of GameMaker's auto depth positioning. So that one was not on me, that one was on GameMaker. So after that long-winded, silly debugging adventure, it was time to add the first structures to the game. This was more of a very early concept, and just to fully flesh out and give us an idea of what we're going to be working with somewhere down the line. And these structures in particular will be spawning at the end of every branching path. And that is assuming buildings don't collide, which is some code that we added to the buildings afterwards, which is if a building happens to collide with another building, the older building will be destroyed and the remaining building will, well, remain. Now at this point, our randomly generated map is starting to look a hell of a lot more like an actual map. So it was time to return to the master builder and get it ready for prime time, so to speak. And the first thing we had to do was, instead of deleting the master builder, which is what I was doing temporarily in the previous Lost episode, instead of doing that, to give it more functions in the future when we're going to need it, I added a variable to toggle on and off, so in the future we can give it more behaviors and other things to do when we need to. And to sort of give you an example of how this would work, I gave the master builder its first function when the active is off, which means it's reached its destination, and that is to check for how many branching paths are left. And so when the branching paths have finally drawn their paths, I want to eventually fill some of the empty spaces with structures of their own. So I added some code to the master builder, and unfortunately, because we have some things that we need to tweak before we actually get this function working properly, the result was more of like a firework effect than anything. But it was a nice, fancy, slightly distracting way to close out that episode. And that's pretty much what happened in the second Lost episode. Now again, firework effects aside, you can actually see that this is starting to look like an actual map. You know, it's got the main road, it's got its branching paths, and at the end of those branching paths is our structures. Now those structures are going to play into the gameplay loop, and I'm probably going to go over those gameplay loops at some point, but just know, again, this is being inspired, quote-unquote inspired, by Pokemon Go. So the best way to look at those structures right now is to look at them as stops or like battle gyms. And again, those will play into the gameplay loop eventually. So effectively, this overworld map system is going to really try to inspire players to explore the map, do what they can within the map, whatever the maps may give them content-wise, you know, approach that, do the gameplay loop, move on to the next map, and then it repeats. So with all that said, that is where I'm going to be ending this episode of Let's Dev. I don't really want to go into details about what you can expect next, but we may take a break from the maps, who knows. I'm really hesitant right now to put anything in stone because I'm very nervous about what the next episode could be like. Again, I am going to take precautions to make sure that the next episode actually happens as a Let's Dev with live commentary and so forth. Fingers crossed. That's all I can say. But I hope you were able to enjoy this recap of not only what we did in the first episode, but the 2 lost episodes. And I hope you guys are still as excited as I am to see where this goes next, because again, look at that. It's starting to look like a map. After so much time and effort and so much bad math, we are getting closer and closer to something passable. So I'm excited. Hope you guys are too. Again, if you enjoy this series and you want to see it continue, please leave a like. And as a viewer, if there are things that I could be doing that would make this more interesting to you from a viewing experience, don't be afraid to let me know in the comments. As I've said before, this is a work in progress and I'm open to your feedback. So be sure to share anything on your mind. I would greatly appreciate it. And speaking of appreciation, once again, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, hopefully things go smoother in the future. But anyway, yes, once again, thank you for watching. And I'll see you guys next time. Let's see if this works. No. What? You know what? Maybe I was right all along. Hold on. Fun fact. You know, when you're writing code, you might want to check your spelling. I really should have just copy pasted to you know, make things quicker on my